This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is James Arnold Taylor, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi. I have a good feeling about this.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to Coffee with Kenobi, show number 355. We are your spoiler-free place for Star Wars discussion, analysis, and rhetoric. I'm your host, Dan Z, drinking One Nation coffee out of my orange Coffee with Kenobi logo mug. Thrilled to be here with you talking Star Wars, of course, as we do each and every week. On today's show, George Mann, the author of Star Wars Dark Legends, joins us to talk about his love of horror and folklore and how they work together to combine for an amazing Star Wars story that you will not want to miss. Speaking of things you're not going to want to miss, we are running, well, it's labeled a fundraiser on Coffee with Kenobi. It is from Custom Ink, and that's the only way I could label it, so that if you order one of these, you can individually get it shipped to your homes instead of it all coming to me and me having to go to the post office and mail out a bunch to a bunch of people. So this is the CWK Alliance black trucker hat. It's got a gray mesh. It's got the awesome logo that Corey has on the back of it. It looks fantastic. We need to get 20 of them ordered so that we can actually place an order for this thing. So if you see it on there and you're wondering what's going on, it's merely just something fun. We love the hats. TeePublic, which is where we normally do our merchandise, doesn't offer hats, and we found Custom Ink had one, and we absolutely loved it. And you may have seen the announcement on CWK Live every Monday night at 8 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time, but we announced that our Patreon page has been relabeled to be called the CWK Alliance. I like the idea behind it. I do feel like in Star Wars, our fandom is an alliance. We are united, and we come from a lot of different places and backgrounds, but we all come together because of our love of Star Wars and spreading the positive message, so much of which is inherent in the world of Star Wars. So now, our Coffee with Kenobi Patreon page is known as the CWK Alliance, but there are a number of ways that you can support Coffee with Kenobi through the CWK Alliance. One, of course, is to be a member of our Patreon page, and another way is to place an order for one of these CWK Alliance baseball caps. They are really, really sharp looking. It's a great way to support Coffee with Kenobi and the CWK Alliance and help out the show. Speaking of the CWK Alliance, be sure to check out our Coffee with Kenobi Patreon page, www.coffeewithkenobi.com/support or www.coffeewithkenobi/CWK Alliance. There are some new options on there available as incentives and rewards for you as well. So pull up a chair, grab your favorite coffee mug, and let's have some coffee with Kenobi.
So who talks first? You talk first? I talk first.
Joining me today for a cup of coffee is the author of Star Wars Dark Legends, George Mann. George, welcome to Coffee with Kenobi.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
It is a pleasure, good sir, and as a mythology teacher and a fan of Star Wars and storytelling, your work hits all the right notes. Talk to me about how you found yourself into the world of Star Wars and writing for them.
Wow, okay. So, I mean, I've always been a huge fan of Star Wars, like most of us. I grew up with the movies and later the expanded universe. And I've always consumed Star Wars as a fan. And it was only in recent years, really, you know, I've written a lot of original fiction. I've written tie-in for other brands such as Doctor Who and Warhammer and things. And it was at San Diego Comic-Con. I got talking to Michael Siglain, who's the creative director of Lucasfilm Publishing, and just on a social level, really, introduced by my friend Cavan Scott, who I'm sure you know, Cav.
Yes.
Who works on the High Republic books, amongst other things. And we developed kind of a friendship, a mutual appreciation of kind of horror movies and classic Hammer horror and things like that. And just had a nice time chatting. And then went away, and as you do after these kind of events, we followed each other on social media. And that was that, really, until the next convention, which was New York Comic Con, where I happened to be out for drinks again, a social do, and Mike Siglain was there, and he took me to one side and said, "I bought your book," because in between the two conventions, I released a new novel, which was kind of spooky crime novel with kind of a fictional mythology in the story. And he said, I read your Witchwood novel, and tell me about the mythology that was in it. Was that real, or did you create it? And I said, oh no, I created it. You know, it was a fictional part of the story. And he said, would you be interested in doing that for Star Wars? And at that point, I nearly kind of fell off my seat. And that's where the first Myths and Fables book came from. Really, was that initial discussion, and we kind of spiraled from there and went into conversations about how that could work. So yeah, that was Mike's original pitch to me. Was, we want something that has the feel of Grimm's fairy tales about it. So that the first thing I did, aside from coming home and kind of consuming loads of Star Wars again, like revisiting the movies, revisiting Rebels, Clone Wars, and a load of the books, I went back to Grimm's fairy tales, and I sat and read a lot of the original stories. Same with Aesop's fables, and kind of anything I could lay my hands on that had that kind of that mythology and fable quality to them, that folklore-ish story. I've got a lot of books about folklore. I'm fascinated by British folklore in particular. So I delved into all that, and that really set the tone for the stories to come, because what those ostensibly Grimm's fairy tales are written for children, but when you read them, they're actually quite dark. When you go back to the original texts, Hansel and Gretel, they're going to get cooked in an oven, and they manage to escape but cook the witch instead. They're pretty brutal stories with these quite powerful morals at the core of them. So what we wanted to do with Myths and Fables was to kind of recreate that atmosphere, but also to try and cover a broad range of Star Wars stories from right across the galaxy, different aspects of Star Wars lore as well.
And I think that comes through so absolutely beautifully. Again, as a teacher of mythology, folklore, and legends, I've always been intrigued by these particular stories because they tell you about the culture, but they also very much teach lessons and values and sort of preferred ways to live and preferred ways to not live. So that you have the love of that, but then you've got the unique challenge of writing these from a Star Wars perspective. But then to add to that, everything in your stories, which I love so much, is that conceivably these stories could have been told to Luke Skywalker, to a young Ben Solo, to anybody in the Star Wars universe. Talk about kind of the extra level of that.
Yeah, and thank you for your kind words. Yeah, absolutely. That was what we wanted to do. We said we need to do this properly. We needed to feel free in the sense that we weren't confined by canon. In the sense, Myths and Fables don't adhere to normal logic. They have their own internal logic, their own internal kind of sense of how the world works. And we wanted that in Star Wars. So to do that, we really felt, well, we can't set out to write canon stories, but what we can do is they're canon in the sense that they're the stories that would have been told in the Star Wars universe to children such as Luke and Leia, or throughout all of time, and on different worlds and different races. And, again, bringing that Grimm's fairy tale thing, I kind of sat down and went, what's the moral core of each story? What's the lesson that the child would be learning from this story? So I was kind of very clear about that as I built the story around that idea. And that's the beauty of these legends, that we were able to kind of, I still can't believe what Lucasfilm let me get away with, to be honest. But I suppose they have a kind of plausible deniability about the truth in those stories. But what's great about it is then it's left up to us as readers to then interpret, the events in the stories. And my kind of feeling about them is that there's always a grain of truth at the core of the story. Something happened, but it's been told and retold and interpreted so many times that it's gained this mythic quality. But at the heart of it, and the astute reader in some of these stories will be able to say, "Oh, okay, I understand what's going on here. I can see that character was actually Obi-Wan Kenobi, or that character was Darth Vader, etc., etc." But I suppose because we're coming at it from from the point of view of fans who have a knowledge of the Star Wars universe more so than any person living within that universe would have. We can understand it with a different view than they can. So some of it is absolutely about how the people in universe would have interpreted events, how a planet that's never heard of Darth Vader would try and rationalize what Darth Vader is. Or in the case of the Dark Legends story about Darth Vader, the predecessor, it was about looking at what is the impact of Darth Vader beyond the obvious, beyond what we see on screen. He sits in those boardrooms, or he walks around those boardrooms and he chokes someone, force chokes someone to death, and then everyone else has to kind of step up and do what's needed. How do they feel when he's left the room and the body of their colleagues on the floor, and they know that they might be next? They're going to live in fear. It's going to affect them on a very deep level, and that's what I wanted to explore with the predecessor, for example. The ongoing impact of Darth Vader is just as scary as when he's actually in the room with you. It's very much about kind of exploring the in-universe elements and trying to put a proper Star Wars filter onto those stories.
And so the story that you're talking about is the predecessor, and it's delightful. I really would love to kind of go through each one.
Sure.
One of the great things about being the host and brand director of Coffee with Kenobi is I get a lot of great things I get to read all the time. It's always like Star Wars Christmas at my house. But this was extra special. I read this thing in a day. I just sat down and I couldn't put it down.
Wow.
And as a teacher of literature, I felt like everyone was kind of filtered through a classic horror lens.
Yes.
Which I think is wonderful. So to me, The Orphanage very much reminded me of sort of like a classic vampire tale. At least that's how it kind of struck me. What was some of your inspiration for this one?
Yeah, you've absolutely nailed that there, actually. So kind of, I was talking more broadly about myths and fables. With Dark Legends, we specifically wanted to tell obviously darker stories, and I mentioned earlier, myself and Mike Siglane both have a love of Universal horror and Hammer horror films and kind of classic horror and ghost stories, going back to M.R. James. So really, yeah, I wanted to kind of delve into those for inspiration with these, and still have kind of retain that moral core. So when I sat down to come up with the stories for Dark Legend, I was thinking, well, we want a story that feels a bit like a vampire story, story that feels a bit like a werewolf story, a story that's a bit like Jekyll and Hyde, but with a proper Star Wars twist on them. And the Orphanage was the first story I wrote. Actually, it's the story that set the tone for the whole book. And it came from, I was kind of brainstorming ideas at the point, making just notes and lists, and I'd gone back to watching Rebels again, which is one of my all-time favorite kind of Star Wars shows. And there was just a moment when there was a close-up on screen of the Grand Inquisitor's face, and he had those kind of spiky teeth and that gaunt aspect and the slightly sunken eyes, and I just went, it's Nosferatu.
Yes.
And then I had this whole thing of like, well, the Grand Inquisitor stood before a window with the classic from the classic movie. So I emailed Mike straight away and just went, Grand Inquisitor is Nosferatu, and he just emailed straight back in capitals with exclamation marks going, "Do it! You must do it!" So that was the first story, and yeah, absolutely it was that playing on that kind of vampire theme, but without being too obvious. Hopefully, about in terms of he's not coming in and biting people's necks. It was more, living up to what the Grand Inquisitor did, which was to seek out Force-sensitive people to make sure that the rebellion were not going to have more Jedi in the future. So kind of leaning into that and trying to make it into a scary story. And I think with that story in particular, obviously, it's told from the point of view of a child. And that's another thing I really wanted to do in this book, was to have at least one story that was told from the point of view of a child, because then you get the child's view of the Star Wars universe as well. So, she doesn't know who this monstrous figure is. she doesn't really understand who the Jedi survivor is who comes to help her. She doesn't understand what the Force is. But I think that's really, although it's still quite a dark story. It's probably the only one in the book that's got a relatively happy ending, I think, as well.
I was just going to say, I think this is, if memory serves, this is the only one where at the end, they're survivors, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
But the fear that is still inherent in her, and I guess that will be her struggle, to balance light versus dark, and whether she's going to let fear overtake her or not. Yeah. I love that it was sort of ambiguous and open-ended. That makes for potential to hopefully revisit these characters in the future.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's whether that's me or someone else. I think what I really feel is with Star Wars, I'm trying to add something to a thing that I love. Basically, it's about giving something back to Star Wars, and I always want, if I write for any franchise like this, but particularly with Star Wars, I always want to feel like I've contributed something, and that to the biography of that character's life, in the sense of this is an incident that might have happened to the Grand Inquisitor, and other writers might reference it in future, or me, depending on what else I get an opportunity to write, I could pick up on those characters, the Jedi survivor and the young orphan girl who's just taken to, presumably be a Padawan of sorts. So yeah, I mean, that's always my hope, is that I can get to revisit some of these things.
Which I think we would certainly love that. And I can say, when I was reading this first story, because it is the first story, I was reading it in my living room when the sun was shining brightly and through the living room, and I was legitimately creeped out. In fact, I heard a noise and I kind of looked over my shoulder, and which it's always fun when you can read a story that does that. And again, the fact that you put it in the Star Wars universe, and the genius, I think, of this book is that you have these fun little things that are almost like Easter eggs, but they're not. And as you said, a discerning reader might be able to sort of glean what is exactly going on, which I think adds to the excitement and the mystery of the book. Speaking of mystery, buyer beware. And again, this is just sort of my literature teacher initial experience, but to me, this read like an Edgar Allan Poe story because of the narrator.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess what I was aiming for, it was probably more inspired than anything else by one of the Hammer, I think it might actually be an Amicus anthology movies, Portmanteau, where I'm trying to think. I can't remember. I can't remember the name of it. But the character is basically a shopkeeper. Yes. Who has an antique shop full of cursed items, and played by Peter Cushing. And it's like kind of a monkey's paw type tale, it's that
very much
that thing of, greed and, you might get more than you bargained for, sort of moral. And yeah, but obviously with its links to Batuu and Dok-Ondar's shop.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
MEI and Mouse Fan Travel is your one-stop shop for your vacation needs and your plans to Walt Disney World, Disneyland, or the cruise lines. Travel looks much different now than it did a couple of months ago, and with the opening of Walt Disney World and soon, hopefully, the opening of Disneyland, you need a place to go where you can trust, and they will help you figure out and navigate all the different circumstances and guidelines that Disney has put out for you. And I can say that we had our vacation modified, and as soon as dates were announced, MEI contacted me directly to help me reschedule, which is exactly what I was hoping to do. So if you are interested in rescheduling your vacation or want to try to plan a Walt Disney World, Disneyland vacation, or anywhere else you want to go on the planet, be sure to contact MEI and Mouse Fan Travel at www.coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefan-travel. Their signature service and expert advice will help you maximize your vacation time and dollar, and they will help you figure out all the different changes and modifications going on at the Disney theme parks. They are amazing, and I can tell you, honestly, from the bottom of my heart, the peace of mind that Becky Menken and the crew at MEI and Mouse Fan Travel have given me is invaluable. If you're interested at all, Again, go to www.coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel. And that's also fun, too, because I like to imagine sort of walking through Batu and thinking about, oh, children who grew up here may have heard this story, and, and it ties right into Doc Ondar. It's another fun example, too. Buyer Beware reminded me to a degree of some of the more recent Darth Vader comics as well, and how everything just kind of ties together and adds to sort of the mystery of these characters, the mystery of the dark side. And so a lot of these stories, Blood Moon in particular, I thought was intriguing because that focused on the psychology, I think. I mean, they all do, certainly to a degree, which is some of the great fun about this book. But Blood Moon is great because it plays on sort of the classic werewolf horror tropes, but it makes it much more personal, I think, too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of hesitated with how far to go with werewolves and to do transformations and things. And really, you've got this just vein and race there on the plate for you, so it had to be that. But I also wanted to get the Lasat in there as well, and got these two kind of potential characters that could be affected by the Kyber sun and the flares, and yeah, I suppose in the sense it's a different type, like you say, it's a different type of tale where a lot of the stories, including Buyer Beware, they're about the path to the dark side and how it's paved in good intentions, or that the character's hubris is the thing that brings them down. That like the guy with the mask, if he hadn't been as greedy, if he'd stopped earlier and hadn't kept going back to the mask, he probably would have got away with the murder. He probably would have got away with getting the power and having the treasures. And it's only because success breeds the need for more success, and that idea of that's how the dark side gets you off the path of righteousness. One mistake leads to another, and suddenly, before you know it, you're lost. Blood Moon was more about showing, I suppose, a bit about prejudices, people's prejudice,
Yes.
and also showing how external factors can affect things. It was, classic monster movie type stuff. The guy can't help himself; his baser instincts are coming out because the Kyber solar flares, like a giant bit of Kylo Ren's lightsaber in the sky, playing with his mind and turning him into a monster. And yeah, making him become the monster that he looks like, because it's playing with that idea that actually, generally, these creatures that look like werewolves aren't bad guys. That it's just another race like any other race. But this thing flicks a switch in his mind and tips him over the edge. So yeah, that was kind of the werewolf monster movie story, really.
And it was delightful. And this one I felt a particular sort of pang besides the orphanage, because you knew this character, even though it looks like the classic creature, or, as we remember from the first time we saw A New Hope when we were all growing up, it evokes that. But then there's some legitimate dread and excitement. Again, this is another fun part about Star Wars Dark Legends is you've got horror in it, but you've got elements of science fiction and action adventure. And I got to tell you, it plays really, really beautifully on the page.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I think what we were trying to do is to get a good spread, a good representation of as many elements of Star Wars as we could. So you can't have, Star Wars without a few chases, a bit of action, droids. You have to have those elements in it. Maybe not in every story, but in a book of stories, you want to kind of touch on all of those elements if you can, because then that helps represent the property properly.
Very much so. And so the next few, the Dark Mirror, the Gilded Cage, and A Life Immortal, I won't spoil anything for anyone, because I definitely encourage everyone to check this book out today, because it is great fun. They all, again, explore psychology. One is from the perspective of the Jedi, one from the Night Sisters. And then the end very much evoked, I think, the tone, especially of the beginning of the rise of Skywalker. Again, three very sort of different avenues, but they all have a very nice horror element. And someone said to me, how scary are these? My kids like scary stuff, but one of my kids gets more scared easily. And I guess if I were to describe this, I would probably say like perhaps a PG or a bit of a more edgy PG as far as the fear factor, because it's there for you, but at the end of the night, you'll be able to sleep, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting getting the balance right, really, because like that was one of the main notes that I got when I on the first drafts was make them scarier.
Wow.
And I was thinking, well, they've got to be suitable for kids, but I think actually, underestimate kids at your peril, really. And
Yes.
I always try not to write down to kids. I mean, these books are intended for all ages, really, but which is kind of like eight up, I suppose. But I think I never try to write down for children. I just write the stories. And I think one of the key things about Dark Legends really is that they are scary, but the bad guys only ever really get what they deserve. If you see what I mean, it's not. Again, there's that moral core to them. It's that if they hadn't done the thing that they were doing, no one would have got hurt, and then they wouldn't get their comeuppance. So I think that was a element I tried to put into it, so that if there are any kids who read it and do get scared, they can talk those stories through with their parents and kind of look at the moral core that's there and understand really that it's this isn't going to happen to me because I'm not going to behave like that.
Right. Again, another perfect example of what a good mythology, a good fable does. The bad guys get their comeuppance, and it's typically as scary for them ultimately as it is for their victims, which I think, again, I really hope you get to revisit Dark Legends in the future, because I love the tone, and I think it's, as you said, sort of what's the audience. I think anybody who likes to read, it's for the audience. It's perfect for kids. It's perfect for adults. It just got the right tone of scary. It's exactly in my wheelhouse, and I think that's so fun. And another element of the book that's so fun, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, is the illustrations by Grant Griffin really add to the story.
They're amazing. How lucky am I to have Grant Griffin illustrate both of these books?
Yes.
They're, I mean, what's wonderful for me actually is the way that this process works. I pitch more stories than we need. We then have lots of discussions about which stories we want. We pick a spread of stories. I turn those into outlines. And then they go to Grant with some suggested art notes. And he starts work. And at the time he's working on the art, I'm actually writing the stories because, we're working from an approved outline at that point. But what that means is quite often I'll be writing a story or just about to start writing a story and I'll get a piece of art through. It might only be a sketch, but one of Grant's sketches is a work of art in itself. And it feeds back into the story. It has a real influence. It inspires me to want to, to dig into that story. And there'll be elements that Grant will incorporate in his artwork that I'll then go, okay, I'm going to describe the character more like that because I can see where Grant's going with it, and it becomes a collaboration. Even though we never really discuss stuff, it's all done through Lucasfilm. It's still writing. So I feel incredibly lucky to have worked with Grant on this, and the Vader cover, it's just blew me away.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
As we begin to wrap up the show, I want to thank each of you for taking time out of your busy schedule to have a cup of coffee with me and for helping to spread the word about our Star Wars family we've got here at Coffee with Kenobi. Be sure to tune in Monday nights at 8 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on Facebook Live at www.coffeewithkenobi.com/live or www.facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi and have a cup of coffee, tea, or any beverage of your choosing with me as we continue the conversation. To join us in the CWK Cafe, which is our Facebook group, and share your Star Wars thoughts, comments, reviews, and opinions in a family-free, spoiler-free place that is also drama-free, go to www.coffeewithkenobi.com/community and be a part of the conversation. Talk about this week's show or just talk some Star Wars. I also want to thank all of my new and longtime members of the CWK Alliance and let you know how much I appreciate your help and encouragement. I want to give a special shout out to our CWK Alliance members, Terrence King, Smooth Rivera, Dan Capurso, Aaron, Jim Tallman, JC Poe, Ed Kimoto, Greg McLaughlin, Robert Avila, Dustin Mills, Yancey Evans, Chelsea Sansbury, Connie Shee, Tyler Pompa, Hannah, Alex Procasio, Ian Thompson, David Nicely, Simbot Tetradarian, Christine Turk, Ross Halliban, Kurt McKellen, Dan Ream, Colby Mead, Alexander Moylan, Frank Mulder, Blake Weaver, Jim Capron, Chris Metz, LJ Souter, Aaron Harris, Chris Skavarka, Jeff Ellis, Daz Davies, Susan Gray, Thea Selby, Christian Dale, Brian McKinney, Jason Hall, Jared Cantor, Eric Struthers, Mark Suter, Angela Sauce, and Dennis Keithley. If you want to become a member of the CWK Alliance, go to www.cwkalliance.com and sign up today. Not only will you help out Coffee with Kenobi, but you will also get access to CWK Pour-Over, the exclusive weekly podcast not heard anywhere else. It's a great way to support and help out the show, and 10% of your monthly contributions go directly to the St. Jude Children's Hospital to support the incredibly important work they are doing to help these brave children and their families. Plus, contributors at the CWK All-Star level can watch a video podcast of CWK Pour-Over hosted by me, Tom Gross, and Corey Clubb. Definitely let me know if you have any questions at all. In addition to being part of the community on Facebook, please don't forget to visit our website at www.coffeewithkenobi.com for Star Wars news, announcements, reviews, live video, and so much more. If you have a question for me or just want to share your thoughts on the air, feel free to email me at danz@coffeewithkenobi.com and I'll share them on the show. You can also connect with me on Twitter at Mr. Zehr, MRZEHR. There are also a lot of ways to connect with me and Coffee with Kenobi on social media. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Give us a like on Facebook at facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi and check us out on Pinterest. You can find me twice a month on the podcast Looking at Lucasfilm, part of the Jim Hill Media Podcast Network, and you can find my writing on CWK's website, as well as StarWars.com, where I'm an official blogger there, as well as on IGN, where I contribute articles on Star Wars, as well as other pop culture topics. And if you're considering starting a podcast or a blog, let me know how I can help you get started and help you make your creative vision a reality. Be sure to check out danzmedia.com and we can get the process started. I am also available to come to your school, conference, business, or organization to talk about how to tap into your strengths and help you bring out your very best. I want to inspire you to be inspired. Don't be afraid to take that first step into a larger world. Thanks as always to our CWK sponsors, especially MEI and Mouse Fan Travel, our travel partner and your one-stop shop for all things Walt Disney World, Disneyland, the Disney Cruise Lines, or anywhere you want to go on the planet. Please go to www.coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel to book your magical vacation and help support Coffee with Kenobi in the process. If you like this show, please tweet out that you're listening, share it on Facebook, or invite your friends and family to tune in and share a cup of coffee with us. And if the Force is especially with you, please take a couple of minutes to rate and review the show on iTunes or Google Podcasts. Every review makes a huge difference and helps to spread the word. Go to iTunes and search Coffee with Kenobi and you'll see the show there. My circle of friends has grown so much because of each and every one of you, and it means so much to me that we have such a wonderful Star Wars community. Well, the two of you is a wonderful collaboration, as is the idea of mythology, Star Wars, and horror all in one. Both Myths and Fables and Star Wars Dark Legends are available now, and they are excellent books. George, is there anything you can tell us about your next Star Wars collaboration?
Not at the moment. I'm hopeful that there will be more. What shape or form that takes, I don't know. Watch this space. I'm talking to the guys, and hopefully we'll, there'll be more to come in the future.
Well, we will certainly be more than ready to dive in. They are so great. George, thank you so much for being on Coffee with Kenobi. Where can people reach out to you if they want to ask you a question or just say hello?
Twitter's always the best place to find me, at George_Mann. And pop up on there, ask any questions. I'll do my best to answer them, and keep the conversation going. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, my friend, for being on Coffee with Kenobi.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Again, be sure to check out the hat orders for the CWK Alliance. We only need 20 orders placed to make this happen, and we are very much excited to support these things and celebrate this community that we have here at Coffee with Kenobi in the world of Star Wars fandom. Have a great week and weekend, everybody, and we will see you Monday night at 8 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time for Facebook Live. We are going to look at your top 5 favorite red lightsaber wielders. Not just Sith, but anyone who has ever wielded a red lightsaber in the world of Star Wars. We want you to rank them, your top 5 favorite ones. Hope to see you on Facebook Live, www.coffeewithkenobi.com/live. Until next time, this is the podcast you're looking for.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here. Move along.